are military analytics. During the Cold War, Poland, which was a member of the Eastern Bloc, is one of the main countries affected by the geopolitical changes that took place in Central and Eastern Europe in the early 1990s. The Warsaw administration first remained neutral for a while after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Then NATO became a member of the EU. Therefore, Poland is an important regional power located on the border with Ukraine. At the same time, Poland was among the countries most affected by the Russia-Ukraine war, which started on February 24, 2022, as it is a neighbor to Ukraine. That's why the Warsaw government is trying to protect its borders. There is a historical sense of insecurity in relations between Poland and Russia. The Ukraine war has further cemented insecurity. As a matter of fact, the developments may drag Poland into a wide conflict that may have devastating consequences. In fact, according to some experts, the war may spread to Poland in an instant. Against such risks and threats posed by Russia, Poland began to take very serious measures in order not to be the next target and to challenge Vladimir Putin. The Polish government says that within 2 years, the country's armed forces will double, making it the most powerful military group in Europe. Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak announced plans to increase the country's army from 150,000 to 300,000 due to Russian aggression. The defense minister wants Poland to build an army big enough to act as a dam that won't be demolished by Russia. With this move, Poland aims to deploy its army up to the Russian border. In addition, Poland stated that by increasing the number of soldiers, it will have an army 3 times the size of the United Kingdom. The British Army has about 100,000 soldiers in active service. Faced with a general election in the autumn, the Polish government also embarked on a massive defense spending spree of billions of pounds that resulted in massive orders for tanks, artillery, and warplanes. Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak said, "We wanted to serve for another term because then we can finish the process we started." Mariusz Błaszczak said he needed 2 more years. Błaszczak stated that within 2 years the Polish army would become the strongest in Europe. Błaszczak added that Poland will soon receive dozens of US-made Abrams tanks. The government ordered 116 old M101 Abrams as a temporary measure to replace the tank shipped to Ukraine. The minister stated that the elderly Abrams will join the 18th Mechanized Division stationed in eastern Poland. So far, the first batch of M101 tanks has arrived in Poland. In addition, the Polish army will have added all 250 Plankmass 1A2 SCP Vol 3 tanks to its inventory in a few years. The M1A2V Abrams tanks are 3rd generation, but the upgrades it has received bring it closer to the 4th generation. In addition, the K2 Panther tanks are currently the world's most advanced and the first 4th generation tank. This will make Poland the largest tank power in Europe, eclipsing the UK's 227-man fleet. 96 AH-64E Apache helicopters purchased from the USA and 48 FA-50 warplanes currently ordered from South Korea will provide strong air support to Poland. In addition, Poland received 32 F-35 fighter jets and at least 6 F-22 fighter jets from the USA. All this will double the size of the Polish army. In other words, Poland will establish the strongest army in Europe, Błaszczak said. First and foremost, we wanted to deter any attackers. We wanted to show them that the Polish army is strong and equipped with modern weapons. Also, Poland is launching military training courses for civilians. The Polish government is launching a 16-day Reign as a Soldier basic military training course for anyone interested. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of National Defense, Mariusz Błaszczak spoke about the details of the operation at the opening ceremony of the program in the Warsaw Armored Brigade. The head of the Ministry of Defense emphasized that the organization of such training is important to increase the reserves of the Polish army. Participation in the training will be free. In addition, volunteers will be offered a monetary reward for successfully completing the training. The training includes gun holding and shooting practice, a survival and hand-to-hand combat course, basic drills, and more. Military units will provide food, accommodation, equipment, and insurance to the volunteers. The training is divided into 2 stages. The first is a 2-day preliminary meeting in May. The second consists of a 14-day exercise that will be held with 30 military units across the country. Training ends by taking a military oath and entering the reserve of the Polish army. On the other hand, Poland is implementing a program to increase ammunition stocks for the needs of its army. Hostilities in Ukraine indicate the need for significant stockpiles of ammunition, especially for artillery. This leads to the implementation of a long-term program in Poland called the National Ordnance Reserve. The purpose of the National Ordnance Reserve program is to expand and diversify the national production base of large-caliber artillery munitions and replenish its own stockpiles. The main efforts are directed at increasing the production of large-caliber artillery shells, which are currently insufficient in Europe, both to replenish their own stockpiles and to deliver them quickly to Ukraine as military aid. The program will run between 2023 and 2029. The program will be implemented based on the resources of the Polish Development Fund, the Industrial Development Agency, the State Strategic Reserves Agency, and the Ministry of National Defense. Poland also claims to expand the production of shells for Abrams tanks with armor-piercing cores made of depleted uranium. The country also wants to establish a business in Europe that will maintain and repair Abrams tanks. As previously reported, Poland and Ukraine will produce tank shells for Soviet-era combat vehicles, which are currently the main tanks of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. The agreement defines the principles of cooperation between Polish and Ukrainian companies in the field of production of 125mm round tanks. Under the terms of the agreement, both parties decided to build new production lines in the near future. They will allow the production of 125mm tank shells in large quantities for the needs of the Ukrainian army. With the measures it has taken, Poland plans to gain the power to challenge Vladimir Putin. We will wait and see how Poland's expansion towards the Russian border and increased military activities will affect the Russian leader. In another development, Russia's attempt to invade Ukraine is revolutionizing NATO military strategy. Shocked by Russian aggression, NATO becomes a war alliance committed to defending every inch of its territory from day one, as it was during the Cold War. NATO is rapidly moving from what the military calls deterrence by retaliation to deterrence by denial. In the past, the theory was that if the Russians invaded, member states would try to hold on until their aid arrived. But after Russian persecution in the areas it occupied in Ukraine from Bucha and Irpin to Mariupol and Kherson, border states like Poland and the Baltic states no longer want to risk any period of Russian occupation. NATO has now deployed a battalion of multinational troops to 8 countries along its eastern border with Russia. It details how these forces will be expanded to brigade power in these front states in order to increase deterrence and repel the invading forces from the very beginning. In addition, NATO is deploying thousands more forces to act quickly for support, with new detailed plans for mobility and logistics and stricter requirements for preparation in the event of war. NATO is also aligning long-term demands from its allies with its current operational needs. Planning in NATO is already intrusive, but will become more demanding, and specific countries answer surveys about their capacities and equipment. NATO planners let them know what is missing, what can be cut and thinned. Change in NATO began slowly in 2014 after Russia annexed Crimea and sparked an uprising in eastern Donbass. At their summit in Wales last year, the NATO allies agreed on a target for military spending to be 2% of gross domestic product by 2024. Currently, only 8 out of 31 countries, including new member Finland, have met this target, but military spending has declined. On the other hand, after 2014, NATO also agreed to deploy 4 battalion-sized small forces in the Baltic states and Poland. The idea was to engage the invaders and hope to get reinforcements a week or two after an invasion. After the invasion of Russia last year, NATO added 4 more forward-based battalions to form 8 such forces along NATO's eastern border now, including Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, and Bulgaria. It seems that the Ukrainian war was not limited to affecting the lands of Eastern Europe. Only Russia's aggression has also mobilized NATO, especially its border neighbors. Poland in particular dealt an unexpected blow to Putin with its latest moves. How will Russia react to the daring moves of its border neighbor Poland? The Ukrainian war has been shaped largely in favor of Ukraine, thanks to Western aid to Ukraine since its inception. The Ukrainian army gained the upper hand against Russia with the weapons that its Western partners had donated at the beginning of the war. Despite Russia's blitzkrieg, the multi-man fast attack strategy, which has been going on since World War II, the West's cutting-edge weapons made Ukraine regret that the Russians would enter their country. The Russian army generally continues the Ukrainian war with Soviet-era weapons and ammunition. Although Russian President Vladimir Putin's army has modern Russian-made weapons, Russia, which cannot import spare parts from outside due to global economic sanctions and whose domestic production has stopped, has to use its new weapons in a limited way. Because of this, Russia has not experienced any tangible war gains in the past year, and the casualties of its army have reached enormous proportions. Although Russian President Vladimir Putin still wants to buy weapons from countries that support Russia, global economic sanctions have also affected Russia's partners. Thus, Russia's import of weapons from the West was also prevented. Although it has received ballistic missiles from North Korea and kamikaze drones from Iran, this is not enough to win the war for Putin's army. Let's examine the cause of the Ukrainian war and the effect of Russian losses on the army. The Ukrainian armed forces said in a statement that Russian forces lost 21 tanks in a single day. In addition, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces reported that 23 additional armored personnel carriers and 8 artillery systems from the Russian army and nearly 800 Russian soldiers were destroyed in the past day. This loss is equivalent to almost an entire tank battalion. This is the third biggest casualty the Russian army has ever seen. Earlier, Putin's army lost 3 tank battalions and 2,500 soldiers in one day on the Severodonetsk River against the Ukrainian artillery. Last month in Volodar, the Russian army again lost 1 tank battalion and more than 2,000 soldiers. Now, this loss has occurred around Bakhmut. By Ukraine's calculation, this brings Russia's total tank losses to 3,600. Kiev authorities have repeatedly shared images of destroyed Russian tanks on social media. The admirable effort of the Ukrainian defense troops melted down Russia's huge stock of tanks. The advanced Western munitions used by the Ukrainian army also played a large part in Russia's loss of so many tanks. Of course, the result of the Ukrainian army's destruction of so much Russian ammunition reflects negatively on the army because the ammunition of the Ukrainian army is decreasing day by day. The immediate arrival of the aid packages that are expected, especially for the great offensive movement to begin, is the only way for Ukraine to maintain its dominance on the ground. Ukraine's presidential chief of staff said Kiev was discussing upcoming U.S. military aid, including weapons and ammunition, said U.S. officials. Officials of the two countries discussed the current situation at the front, combat operations in the most difficult directions, and the urgent needs of the Ukrainian army. During the meeting, the U.S. Department of Defense said that Ukraine has no time to lose before the expected spring attack. The USA needs to fulfill its promises to Kiev quickly and completely. This will bring armored capabilities to the battlefield and ensure that Ukrainian soldiers receive the training, spare parts, and maintenance support that they need. So how many Russian casualties are there, really? Many estimates differ, but independent sources put Russia's visually verified tank losses at 1847. In addition, 1101 Russian soldiers were destroyed by Ukrainian forces on the same day. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed that its forces have destroyed 8,338 Ukrainian tanks and armored combat vehicles since the beginning of the war, according to the Russian Defense Ministry's claim. The total number of tank and armored combat vehicle losses by Ukraine and Russia is around 15,000. Officials said Russia lost up to 50% of its key pre-war tank fleet in the first 9 months of the war. Just before the publication of this report, it was reported that Russia had probably lost half of the tanks deployed in the war. Last month, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev said that after Western aid to Kiev, Russia would increase production of military vehicles, including modern tanks. In this case, it is natural for Russia to increase the production of various weapons, including modern tanks. However, the export of important parts of modern tanks and the economic sanctions against Russia hinder this production. The UK Defense Ministry said yesterday that Russia's military production is a critical weakness exacerbated by the ongoing war in Ukraine. Production almost certainly falls short of the demands of the Russian Ministry of Defense to fund the Ukrainian campaign and restore long-term defense requirements. On the same day, the Ukrainian General Staff said that 710 Russian fighters had been killed in the last 24 hours. Kiev's death toll is typically higher than Western estimates, and the UK Defense Ministry said that probably as many as 60,000 Russian soldiers and mercenaries have been killed in Ukraine since the start of the all-out war. The ministry added that approximate losses for Russia could be 200,000. It has been confirmed that 17,000 375 Russian soldiers have died since the start of the war last year, excluding militia fighters in the Donbas districts of Donetsk and Luhansk. Russia's death toll in Ukraine was claimed to be around 35,000. The most conservative estimate, according to the most cautious figures. The total Russian losses, including the dead, disappeared or dismissed, were reported by the authorities at 157,500. Every day that the war is not over, the Ukrainian army gets a little more experience. And with this experience, it puts the Russian army in a difficult situation on the front line. The defense lines of the Russian army are officially at the point of disintegration, and with each successful attack by Ukraine, the Russian army is sinking further and further. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Ukrainian army repelled 62 attacks of Russian forces in the east in 4 directions. The Russian army concentrates its main efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Lyman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Marine directions. The fiercest fighting continues for Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Marinka. According to the military, in the past day, the Russian army carried out 24 airstrikes and 12 missile strikes, 55 attacks from rocket salvo systems. In addition, the Russian military continues to disregard the laws and customs of war and continues to target Ukrainian civilians. The last day civilians were harmed as a result of the missile attack on the infrastructure of the city of Sloviansk-Donetsk region. The number of civilians killed and injured is not clear at the moment. High-rise and detached houses were damaged as a result of the attack. A civilian object in the city of Borislav in the Kherson region was damaged in the Russian airstrikes. It is also reported that during the past night, Russian troops used 15 Shahed-136 assault UAVs to carry out airstrikes, and 14 were destroyed by Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian armed forces reported that 12 Shahed UAVs and 1 reconnaissance plane were shot down the previous night. Military casualties seem to best reflect the nature of warfare. Ukraine is completely under attack, defending its territory and its right to exist until the end. As a result, the Ukrainian people are much more willing to fight than the Russian people who do not have the same motivation. In fact, Russia uses only abstract ideas to justify Russia's war with Ukraine, rather than giving concrete reasons for how this war serves the interests of ordinary Russians. This is the reason why the decision of partial mobilization announced to win the war, and this decision was avoided for a long time. And why so many Russian youth left the country. The mobilized Russian soldiers were mostly recruited from prisons and PO areas formerly sent to slaughter without proper training and support. The very high Russian casualties show us that these populations are weak, expendable, and politically insignificant.